Hello and welcome to the command phase. My name is Mark and thank you so much for joining me. You've chosen your faction and you're ready to get started on building your first Warhammer 40k army. Well, you've come to the right place. In this video we're going to be going through a step-by-step guide on how to start your army and expand it all the way to 2000 points and beyond, breaking it down into manageable chunks. Before we get started, if you haven't chosen your faction yet, check out my Picking Your First Faction guide where I go through every playable faction to help you find your perfect army. This is linked in the top right of the screen now and in the description below. Then once you're happy, come back. So without any further ado, let's get stuck in. This first step is confirming your choice, and I honestly feel this is the most important one when starting an army. For this step, you'll need to pick up a single box of your army's battle line unit, build them up and paint them in your chosen army scheme. There are a few reasons for this. Firstly, this is a low entry cost into the army, as a battle line unit is typically priced somewhere between £25 and £40 or $45 to $60 if you are in America, directly from Games Workshop themselves, although they can be found cheaper from various gaming stores online. We do this so that if you do end up changing your mind, it's not as much of an investment into the army like a combat patrol, Christmas battle force, or for the mad people out there like myself, buying an entire force in one go.
You really are crazy.
Definitely not recommended. As it's just one unit, it's also not an overwhelming first experience when getting into the hobby. Picking up, say, a combat patrol with 3 or more units and a character can feel like a lot, especially when you open up the box and see all of the sprues you have to get through. There's nothing wrong with taking this hobby at your own pace.
Keep breathing. That's the key. Breathe. Oh.
These are typically key units in the force as well, and you'll tend to have at least one of them, and more often than not multiples of them, especially in armies with a larger model count like Astra Militarum. You'll need plenty of these units. Lastly, if you do end up changing your mind during the process of getting this unit built up and painted, for whatever reason it may be, then it's not the end of the world. You haven't spent too much, and the experience gained from doing all of the hobby stages will help you on your next project. So if you're happy with your choice and enjoyed building up this first unit and looking forward to expanding the army further, then it's time to go to the next step. I find that picking up the rules for your army, traditionally being via a codex, is a nice point here to see what your army offers to you in terms of rules, units, and potential combinations you can utilise, plus up-to-date lore on the faction too if you enjoy that aspect of the hobby. While there are some codexes out now at the time of recording this video for 10th edition in the form of the Space Marines and Tyranids Codex, the rest of the faction's index rules and datasheets are available for free on the Warhammer community website. If you'd like physical cards to play with rather than digital, then these are also available to buy, but do note that they will end up being replaced once the codex for each army is dropped. It's also worth noting while you're on the Warhammer Community Downloads page, there is also the Munitorium Field Manual, which contains all of the up-to-date points values for every model and unit in the game. This gets updated roughly every 3 months with a balance update Games Workshop provides throughout the edition. So do check this every so often when you're writing up a list, as there may well have been changes. You'll notice this either by the date of the last update under the download button or the revision number of the document itself. You do also have the Warhammer 40k app, which has all of the index datasheets, core rules, and an army builder as part of it, although for the free version you'll have access to only one army roster at a time, but if you'd like to have more, that comes part of the Warhammer Plus subscription. Other list building apps like Battlescribe are available if you prefer to use an app. Now we have a key unit ready for the army and the rules, it's time to build a small core force that will be a good way to start playing and get used to the rules, but also to add some variety. This is where Combat Patrol comes in. These boxes, alongside the free rules on the Warhammer Community Downloads page, is a great way to get early games of Warhammer 40k. These boxes are some of the very few added value boxes from Games Workshop and generally a decent core to your army. It typically works out that you'd get one unit free compared to if you ended up buying everything separately. This is something I would recommend picking up next to help you on your way, allowing you to play some fairly balanced games with other people who also have a combat patrol box. Games Workshop have made tweaks and changes to the rules in this compared to the main Warhammer 40k game, but it is a great primer to get started and enjoy rolling some dice. Typically inside a combat patrol you'll find a character unit which will end up being your warlord, a battle line unit and one or two other units from the army to make up a small force. For example, in the Leagues of Votann combat patrol that I've recently built up for my new army, it has a Carl who will be the leader of the force, 10 Hearthkin warriors who are the typical battle line troops unit, 3 Pioneer bikes who will fit the role of a faster mobile unit to get around the board, and 5 Chthonian berserks who are the melee combat damage dealing part of the army. For the Votann, this is a pretty good starting point to build upon, and the same can be said for the vast majority of the other factions' boxes. The only unfortunate thing with these combat patrols is that it tells you which weapons you need to build and equip your units with. In all honesty, feel free to ignore that if there's a better option on the datasheet you prefer, and when playing a combat patrol game, just proxy it to be the one in those specific rules. That way you haven't caused yourself to have built a model with weapons that you won't want to use in a larger army. If you prefer not to go down the combat patrol route as you prefer some different miniatures in your army, then feel free to find yourself a character to be your army's warlord and other units that you enjoy to make a force of roughly 500 points and play some smaller games with that. While these may not be the best balanced games at this points level, you'll still be learning which units work well together and their roles on the battlefield. If you need help writing your first army list, there is a card on the screen now for you for my list building 101 video, and it's also linked in the description below. Now that we have a core of the army, it's time to grow this up gradually to the end goal of a typical game size of 2,000 points, although please don't feel that you need to rush to get to this. 1,000 point incursion games are a great milestone to aim for here. That way you get to mix up the list and try different units out as you go. Plus, if you agree with your opponents a points limit each game, you can slowly grow your force a unit at a time until you've gotten to the 2,000 points mark and even beyond. For me, this is the best way to do it, as you'll get to know how each unit works and gradually understand what units you need to add to your force to deal with certain units or situations. Speaking of key units, these are the main types you should be trying to incorporate into your lists. While you may not be able to get them all in at 1,000 points, it's definitely something to aim for when you get to 2,000 to help you have a better and more enjoyable game of 40k. But of course, the main thing is, if there are units or models that you really loved that drew you into the army, don't forget to put those in. First up is your main damage sources in both ranged and melee. These are your main hitters you're hoping to trade up with during the course of the game, dealing with your opponent's biggest threats. These could be focused on anti-tank, elites, or infantry. With there being a few objectives in no man's land in the middle of the board, having some resilient units to hold objectives in the open will help you score precious primary points. Plus, making your opponent focus on these, allowing your damage dealers to do what they do best. Cheap units to hold the back objectives, perform actions and screen out any enemy movement or deep striking is a must-have. I say cheap as you wouldn't want to spend a lot of points on an expensive unit like Mega Knobs that are lethal just to sit and not be involved in the parts of the game they are better at, when a unit of Gretchen can do the same job. Do look out for benefits on the data sheets for being on an objective too. Again, the Gretchen are able to gain you CP by doing that role, and that can make a big difference over the course of the game. Scout or infiltration units can be an utter nuisance by grabbing midfield objectives early, which can provide a really important gain of primary points for yourself, or stopping your opponent from gaining primary points. This will end up making them a target they probably didn't have to deal with, and spend valuable resources on them instead of your main damage dealers. Plus, you're able to then move block your opponent, making them go where you want them to. Fast moving mobile units are great at taking objectives quickly, getting behind enemy lines and picking off fragile enemy units. They're perfect for completing a fair number of secondaries that require you to be in different areas of the board. Lastly, you've got the buffing characters. With characters now primarily being attached to squads, they provide buffs that could be invaluable. Whether this is adding durability to a unit like a big mech in Mega Armor, giving the unit is attached to a 4+ invulnerable save, or a blade champion allowing your unit to advance and charge once per game alongside re-rolling any of these moves. These abilities could come in clutch during a battle, although I wouldn't want to include more than 5 characters in a 2000 point army so you don't give up easy assassination secondary points. To help solidify this strategy of how to build a force from your core up to 2000 points, I'm going to share the strategy I use to build my new Votann army so you can see my decision making for each milestone. While this may not be the most competitive and optimized list for tournament play, this is a force I felt would give me a good chance in the casual games that I play, and like anything can be tweaked and changed in the future. Starting off from buying the combat patrol, the core of the army I wanted to utilise from it was the following. First up we have the Carl, who at 70 points will be my warlord. He gives me a good way to get judgment tokens on enemy units with grim efficiency, and the Kindred hero buff giving attached units lethal hits, which is a strong buff. Then we have the 10 Hearthkin warriors at 110 points, which is pretty cheap, especially when we can split them up into 5-man combat squads, utilising transports and with sticky objectives on top. With their luck has, need keeps, toil earns ability, they're great at getting me primary objectives. The only thing I wanted to make sure of here was to include a high-las auto rifle for the assault ability to allow me to perform actions after advancing should I wish to. And lastly is the 3 Pioneers. At 90 points these are a great fast mobile unit for a pretty slow army and a fairly short range. These, as mentioned before, are a great way to perform secondaries, get to middle objectives early with their 9-inch scout move, and cause disruption in the backfield. Plus their ability to pop back into strategic reserves with their outflanking Mag Rider's ability is perfect to get them where they need to be for future secondaries. This puts us at 270 points, so a long way left to go to get to that 1000. The units that really caught my eye in the Votann army, as some that I really wanted to play with, were the Hearthguard, which just looked fantastic for that resilient yet heavy hitting unit, the Hecaton Land Fortress just because that thing is so chunky, Sagittars as they are pretty cute little moon buggies that actually provide quite the punch, and the Thunderkin as I love the exo-frame aesthetic. Hopefully something they push with phase 2 of the Votann release, but I digress. I was taking these units into account when growing my list. They won't all fit in at 1000 points, but they certainly all will by the time I get to 2000. So, to fill out the rest of the 1000 points, I mentioned earlier about the ability to combat squad the Hearthkin, and that's where 2 Sagittars come in. At 100 points each, not only do these help protect the Hearthkin warriors, it gives them a 6-inch scout move, 12-inch normal move, plus the ability to disembark after advancing, potentially onto a point or to perform an action is fantastic. Plus, it's a pretty durable profile and shoots pretty damn well too. Moving on to the next unit I wanted, and that was the Hearthguard. This is my tanky unit that actually packs a punch in both shooting and melee with their Etakan plasma guns and the concussion gauntlets. This costs me 150 points for the 5 models and gives the force a unit that can actually contest a midfield objective, and combined with the Carl for lethal hits, deals some serious damage to elite infantry and even vehicles. Then of course we have the Land Fortress. This gun platform can transport the Hearthguard if I wanted to protect them, and just a way to not only take a lot of punishment with its durability, but deal with some bigger threats itself. I also then grabbed a second unit of 3 Pioneers to add some more mobility to the force for that much needed objective play, plus it also gives me some redundancy if one of the units gets shot off the board early on. And lastly, I popped in an Einherjar champion for 60 points to bring our total to 995 points. This character packs a punch in combat, gives reroll charges to the unit they're attached to, and deals mortals on the charge on top. So I feel this list really gives me a solid base for a force. I've got units that are able to score primary and secondaries, mobility which the army typically lacks, and a couple of durable units that can contest midfield objectives and pack a punch. Definitely a good start. Moving up to 1500 points, and for this milestone I wanted to double down on a few units to really make the most of the mission play, as primary and secondaries are how you win the games, not just wiping your opponent off the board, although that's still pretty fun. I added in a second unit of Hearthkin warriors and another 2 Sagittars to combat squad them for 310 points. This gives me the flexibility to get these units into a variety of objectives on the board, plus if I need to get any into different table quarters to do secondaries like deploy teleport homers, investigate signals, or cleanse. Plus I added in another 5-man unit of Hearthguard at 150 points to give me another resilient threat. This time with the Plasma Blades and Vulcanite Disintegrators for more shots and the potential of devastating wounds. This unit is aimed to deal with more of the infantry than the other Hearthguard squad, plus I'll attach the Einherjar champion to this unit to give them the option to deep strike in and reroll charges to disrupt the opponent's backfield if the option is there. I also added on the Appraising Glare enhancement to my Carl for 20 points to give all units an opponent has on an objective marker, counting as 1 judgment token higher than it currently has. So +1 to hit for all of my units if it had 0 tokens, or +1 to wound as well if they had 1 or more, to give my army some more damage consistency each turn on a key objective. This then brings me to a total of 1475 points. This gives me more mission play options for the 4s, and at this point I felt I had everything I needed for that aspect. But to round this up to 2000 points, I needed a bit more hitting power to deal with some bigger threats. This is where I added 2 squads of 6 Thunderkin at 150 points each with grav cannons. These have been taken to deal with enemy vehicles with the anti-vehicle 2+ ability, and to be fair, their weapons are pretty good generally against a lot of other targets too, thanks to Blast on top. And they can overwatch on a 5-up rather than a 6-up, which can prove clutch. I then expanded the 5-man Plasma Gun Hearthguard squad with another 5 more to really increase their threat, making it harder to remove with all those extra wounds, and I just love those models. Lastly, I added a Brokia Ironmaster for 65 points. This character could either be attached to one of the Thunderkin units to give them +1 to hit, or utilise his ability to heal vehicles each turn to keep the Land Fortress and Sagittars up, adding to their resilience. This brought me to a total of 1990 points. Hopefully you can see from the decisions I've made in this list, I was trying to give myself plenty of options for mission play to be able to score well, and this is just one of many ways to build a Votann army. I may well want to swap in different characters or units to make changes depending on how well they do, and of course the list will continue to evolve. We all know that getting to just 2000 points is rarely going to be a stopping point for most of us. You may well want to pick up new units as they come out, or try out different combinations on the battlefield. Those extra models allow you the flexibility in list writing, being able to adapt to your local meta and the overall balance of the game. With the balanced data slate we had on the 7th of September, my Votann list dropped 400 points, which meant I had a lot more room for more options. This may well change in the next balance patch, and I'll need to make adjustments again. This cycle, alongside when Votann get an expansion to their model range and the new codex coming at some point in the edition with the new detachments, just show how things can change. The most important thing to remember throughout all of this is to take your time and enjoy the process. So there you have a guide on how to start your first Warhammer 40k army and the thought processes behind it all. If you have any questions about building an army, please pop them down in the comment section below. I'll do my best to answer them all, and please don't worry, there are no stupid questions. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more like this, please hit that like and subscribe button, as it really makes a huge difference to a small channel like mine. Thank you so much for watching the command phase, and I'll see you in the next video.